you, and I guess I would get right into the thing that I want to present today, which I would like to call the absurdity of life. Is there any meaning? Why is it not working? So a couple weeks ago, I came across a YouTube video in which the narrator talks about a philosophy theory called absurdism. As someone who struggles with existential anxiety and feelings of alienations, that video sprinkled a sense of relief into my troubled mind, as I've never encountered something quite liberating as the idea that life itself doesn't have any inherent meaning, which means that we are not bound by any set of rules or expectations, which means that, as a matter of fact, we are free, totally. Today I would like to give a brief and kind of amateurish talk about the absurdity of life and what we should be doing instead of wasting our precious time pondering the inherent meaning of it all. I'll be quoting quite a lot from the French-Algerian philosopher Albert Camus and his work, The Myth of Sisyphus, and as it is considered the foundational text of absurdism. So at the very beginning of The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus stated, "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. All the rest, whether or not the world has 3 dimensions, whether the mind has 9 or 12 categories, comes afterwards. These are games one must first answer." Since we have a reflective capacity and a cognitive capacity, fundamental questions like where did the universe come from, where did we come from, where are we going, is there any point to our existence, occur to us naturally as human beings. But the thing here is that when we long for definite answers to these questions and we look to life itself, life meets us only with some kind of impassive silence. And isn't that anxiety-provoking and kind of bizarre? It's very easy to instruct someone on small daily tasks. For example, how to use a toaster. Well, you put 1 slice of bread into each slot of the toaster, and then using the dial, you kind of adjust how dark you want your bread. And at last, you pull down the lever and wait for the toast to pop up. But what are we using a toaster for? To prepare our bread, right? But what do we need bread for? To eat. What do we eat for? To live. But what do we live for? The point here is that when it comes to the most basic, most fundamental question, the one that subtends all of these particular moments of our lives, it suddenly becomes very difficult to say anything substantive at all. So the absurdity that we're talking about, what does it mean? Apparently, according to Albert Camus, absurdity is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. Or, the absurd is the confrontation between the infinite passion of the individual and the finite world in which he is placed, according to Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher who is dubbed the father of existentialism. These definitions all share the same basic idea that absurdism is a state of tension or conflict that arises from the collision of 2 opposing forces, and apparently, in the case of absurdism, these 2 forces are the human need for meaning and the indifferent silence of the world. Camus argued that we have 3 choices of responding to set tension, with the first one being suicide in its most literal form, which doesn't sound very appealing. And more commonly, there's the second one called philosophical suicide, which means to buy into belief systems that provide easy stopgap answers to these fundamental questions of life. And the third one, which according to Camus is the only authentic response, is to embrace our own absurd condition. Camus regarded the tension between our natural desire to know what life is actually about and life's unreasonable silence as the central dimension of the absurd. There are many other dimensions, with a more troubling one being life's repetitive and futile character. The reality of most of our lives can be compared to the classical myth of Sisyphus, who was condemned by the gods to an infinite life of futile labor, an endless cycle of pushing a large boulder up a mountain only to see it roll back down again. And, well, by the way, the reason why I put air quotes around the word life when it came to Sisyphus is because he doesn't really have a life. So he is immortal, therefore he never dies, and life itself is defined by death. Well, anyway, back to what we're talking about. How many moments in your life have been truly original, as opposed to just being a rehash of something you've already experienced before? At some level, practically everything I do as a student is a repetition of something I've known. Well, right now I'm participating in this English speaking contest, which may seem out of the ordinary for my daily routine, but I've done this before as well as other types of competitions. Well, and I guess the same thing can be said about you being the judges of today's contest. I bet you found yourself in the position to judge whether something is qualified enough for a certain job you want to assign it to or not, many times before in your life. Well, anyway, back to me. Tomorrow I'll be going to school in the morning, taking a walk in the afternoon, and in the evening hanging out with a friend of mine, all of which I've done a countless amount of times before. And then after my graduation, maybe I'll get a job, and once again I'll find myself the low person on the totem pole, having to follow a pre-established hierarchy or set of rules. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Well, the point here is that, like Sisyphus, the reality of our life involves lots of intense labors with no ultimate purpose to it, and probably the more troubling prospect to that is that life doesn't really provide us any particular reason to believe that all of our labors will ultimately amount to anything. Well, back to our three possible responses to the absurdity of life. Suicide of any form would be a way of agreeing that we're just too miserable to do anything but try to escape it. To deny the absurdity of life is to deny our own freedom. To commit suicide is to give up on that freedom. The only way to find meaning in a seemingly meaningless world is to embrace the absurdity of it all. To accept that life is a series of random events with no ultimate purpose, and to still find joy along the journey, to laugh in the face of the absurd, to live, to love, and to create, even though all of that doesn't mean anything in the end, because in the end, that is all that matters. Well, isn't it a terrifying thought that the universe could snuff us out like a candle at any moment. An asteroid could strike, or a new plague could wipe us out. All that we have accomplished, all that we have suffered for, could be reduced to dust at an instant. Well, life's indifference to us, the insignificant, can be a cruel reality unless we don't let it. Well, I would like to introduce another quote from Albert Camus himself. The meaning of life is that it has no meaning. We are here by chance and we will disappear by chance. So let's make the most of it and enjoy ourselves while we can. One thing that I've come to realize recently is that life doesn't and probably never will provide any perceptible answer as to the reason why we exist. So life just simply provides us itself, and we get to choose what we want to do with it. And that's probably the only thing that we need to do about it. We choose our own path, our own goals, our own purpose. So therefore, the only question that matters is, what will you choose? I would like to introduce an artwork by Adrian Borda called Life is a Dance in the Ring, which in my opinion was created in a rather absurd way. And I think it demonstrates in a very artistic way how we can still learn to thrive even in the most absurd conditions. In conclusion, I would like to say that I find absurdism a powerful way of navigating the modern world. Absurdism doesn't mean that we should give up on finding meaning in life. Absurdism simply means that we cannot expect to find it in a predefined way. You don't need to work yourself to death to live a life of a billionaire, as there's no shame in wanting an ordinary life, and you don't need to lower your standards just because other people have different ideas of what's important. Don't shy away from fulfilling what your heart desires. Seek help if you need help. Offer compassion to others. Live humbly, live courageously. And lastly, I would like to introduce another quote from Albert Camus, because I'm kind of obsessed. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. And that concludes all that I want to share with you today. Thank you for your attention. I am truly grateful to be given the opportunity to stand here and share my humble opinion with you today on this very, very lovely day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your energetic and fascinating performance. This is very interesting topic about absurdity. So here are your questions from the judging panels, and you will have 5 minutes to answer it. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as you know, we are living in and exist in a society in which values of life are influenced by social standards and social norms are also believed. So what would you do to let people think and act freely in this society? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. In my opinion, to be free in our own way of thinking, we must realize that we are free ourselves. Because, well, the way we think, the way we act, well, in the nature of the way we think and the way we act is rooted in our own selves. And, well, I guess you just have to find out on your own way in life that you are free and no one's tying you to anything at all. Well, that concludes my answer. Thank you.
but today you bring to us such a very strange and interesting topic in the competition. And in your talk, you mentioned on 3 continuous options for responding to tension. And you are also in a daily routine of the absurdity when telling your tomorrow plan. As a young, creative, and dynamic generation, why don't you become a deception of adversity? I mean, can you tell us some possible solution you may think of to get out of your life absurdity? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question, but I think that what I'm trying to deliver today is that absurdity is the reality of life, and we cannot try to escape it. We simply live inside it. We live with it. We go with its flow. And what we should do is that we should embrace that absurdity. We live knowing that life is absurd. We live knowing that there's no meaning. There's no inherent meaning, that we should try to live in accordance to what we believe in, to what our values is. We live freely in the absurd. Thank you.